William Clark Russell was an English writer noted for his sea stories, writing about 50 nautical novels during his career. Born in New York in 1844, the son of English composer and pianist Henry Russell and of Isabella Lloyd, it was from his mother, supposedly a relative of the poet William Wordsworth, that he inherited his love of literature. His father soon abandoned his family and married again, for which Russell would never forgive him, not even attending his funeral. Russell was educated in schools at Winchester and in the French coastal town of Boulogne-sur-Mer. At about age 14, he came aboard the Duncan Dunbar clipper ship and sailed on her as an apprentice, serving for 8 years on various ships. The sailor's life was quite hard for Russell, and included shortages of food, brutal discipline at the hands of his superiors, and nearly being stabbed to death by the third mate of the Hougoumont, a convict ship he had served 3 years with. After 8 years he retired from the sea, but his health was permanently affected. In 1868, he married Anna Maria Alexandrina Henry at St. Stephen, Paddington, Westminster. They had 6 children in total. After returning from the sea, Russell became a journalist, writing for the Newcastle Daily Chronicle, the Kent County News, and the Daily Telegraph. His fiction began appearing in the 1870s under a variety of pseudonyms, such as Sidney Mostyn, Eliza Rill Davies, and Philip Sheldon. His The Wreck of the Grosvenor proved exceedingly popular. He wrote at length in his books about the privation of sailors forced to serve on overladen and undermanned ships, and forced to eat repulsive provisions bought on the cheap. And indeed, he wrote with such force on the topic that King George V acknowledged Russell's contribution in inspiring new legislation for the protection of sailors. Towards the end of his life, he suffered from arthritis. He eventually settled at Bath before dying there in 1911. Among his near 60 books, one finds titles such as The Good Ship Mohawk, The Convict Ship, or The Death Ship, betraying his nautical leanings. But his one semi-fantastic story seems to have been his 1887 The Frozen Pirate. The story begins aboard the Laughing Mary, whose entire crew is drinking heavily below, expecting to be smashed asunder in the storm any minute. The narrator, a certain Rodney, ends up being cast out in the polar seas in a small boat as the only survivor. His prospects are bleak, but eventually he is blown into the path of a massive iceberg. Climbing on top, he proceeds to wander about desperately until he comes face to face with a dead man frozen stiff in a cave. Soon after, he discovers where the dead man came from, a schooner jammed into the berg and completely frozen. The ship appears to be a make from the previous century, and aboard, Rodney finds evidence, among several frozen sailors, which leads him to suspect the ship of being a pirate. Discovering a frozen, bearded pirate, he plans to thaw him out so he can throw him overboard, but to his amazement, the old man stirs in front of the fire and comes back to life. He is a Frenchman named Tissard and appears to be a villainous old rogue. Furthermore, he thinks Rodney is mad in claiming Tissard was frozen for 48 years, but the Frenchman needs his help in freeing the ship due to all the treasure in the hold. They plan to free the ship by detonating barrels of gunpowder at choice spots on the iceberg. However, despite spending several chapters describing Tissard's villainous character and how he will assuredly try to kill Rodney when he no longer needs him, Russell never does anything with him, because as soon as the ice breaks up, Tissard suddenly ages to death, so his entire inclusion is basically pointless, as he serves no role in the plot, and the climactic confrontation between Rodney and Tissard, which is alluded to at points as being inevitable, simply doesn't happen. Instead, the last 6 chapters consist of Rodney meeting with an American crew and agonizing over not only how best to smuggle the treasure into England to avoid the customs men, but deliberating on the best method to conceal the true value of the ship's cargo from the Yankees, so he can get off with paying a few £100 each while keeping tens of thousands of pounds for himself, and this being pounds in 1801. Considering how he criticised Toussaint's piratical character before, at length, Rodney agonizing over how best to screw over the people that helped him, smacks of extreme hypocrisy. The book's chief fault is Russell being very long-winded, describing the physical properties, provisions, and sundry items on the schooner to an exhausting detail. He also spends 14 chapters narrating the appearance of the sea and the iceberg, and the novel truly drags for quite a stretch. I am a little disappointed I didn't read his The Death Ship, as that apparently concerns the Flying Dutchman, a whole crew of pirates, and a pretty young thing in need of rescue, instead of one old pirate and a lot of ice and snow.